If you do give a family member money, you have every right to know how it was spent, even if they don't like it. If they don't like you putting that boundary in place, then they don't need to be asking you for it. Hey you guys, welcome to Fiscal Collective, where we have a lot of impolite conversations about money. I'm Efi. Think of me as a friend that's trying to have a really sensitive conversation with you rather than someone who's trying to judge or condemn. Now with that being said, let's get into the video. This year has been an interesting year. Many things that we thought were important, we've realized that they're unimportant. They're not important at all. And some things that we did not focus on, we thought we had a lot of time to address, have started coming to the front of our consciousness. So a lot of that has to do with finances as well as economics. You see, with all of the uncertainty going on in the world around us, a lot of us are really thinking about, how are our finances affected, both right now, as well as what are the long-term implications of any decisions that we make. And if you are coming of age in the midst of all of this craziness, if you're anything like me, where September 11th happened when you were in middle school and you are well into the workforce at this point in time, you may be wondering, what legacy am I going to leave for those that I leave behind? I think what has gone on, at least for me this year, is a questioning of how I spend my time, my money, my attention in the current, as well as what implications does that have for the future version of myself, and also for anything that I decide to leave behind when I'm no longer here. And it's likely that many of you guys have the exact same question. We haven't talked about it yet, but at least from what I see on social media, there's a lot of conversations going on about wealth building and generational wealth. And I'm so glad that those are the conversations that we're having. So I'm sure a lot of you guys are asking the exact same question. And if I was to distill everything that I'm seeing right now, and questions that I think that one should be asking if they're not already doing so, it would be, what can I do today that I can leave an impactful legacy for those that come after me? And the answer to that question is generational wealth. Is generational wealth. Is generational wealth. Now, what I think has been super problematic, however this tends to happen, is whenever there is ambiguity in what people want, you get all these grifters kind of coming in and using it to empower their platform. So I hear a lot of conversations about generational wealth, something that honestly is easy to define but difficult to achieve. I see that politicized, really just made to be an emotional topic, and whenever your emotions are being played on, that's when you're the least likely to make really good decisions. So in this video, I just want to present some facts, have a quick conversation about generational wealth, how to get there. But before we do that, let's establish some definition. First of all, let's define wealth. What is wealth? Wealth is an accumulation of valuable economic resources. It can be measured in terms of real goods or monetary value. The concept of wealth is applied to scarce economic goods, i.e. it's applied to things that are not readily available to everyone. And the reason why that's done is because goods that are readily available to every single person provide no value when it comes to comparing wealth across different people. What is generational wealth? Generational wealth is a lifetime accumulation of wealth which can be passed on to future generations. Now, I know we talked about what wealth is, but let's define what it is more specifically. So there's a personal wealth equation, net worth equation that's commonly used, which is the total assets that someone has minus their total liabilities. And so if we break down that calculation that we just talked about, you would have your beginning net worth factoring into your overall net worth, plus or minus any wealth transfers. We would also have plus income as well as expenses. On the asset side, we have productive and non-productive assets. And then on our liability side, we have any debt such as mortgage-related debt, credit cards, student loans, etc., etc., etc. Overall, when looking at this, you will see an inverse relationship to some things that have no monetary value. So you have, for example, your debt. In your debt category, you have your student loans, and hopefully your student loans over the course of time, we see that people that are college educated tend to out earn those that are not. This does not mean that there are exceptions. This is more so for generally speaking. Whew, so that's a lot. But I think what the greater point of this video is, only when your wealth is zero can you then go towards building having enough wealth to pass on to generations. So in order to become wealthy, you have to accumulate wealth for yourself in your lifetime and or your family. And then you can then pass it on to generations. And I think a lot of people start thinking of this backward, or trying to put essentially the cart before the horse, where they're focused on generational wealth, so building generational wealth, when they themselves, the responsible party, are not the most financially astute or sophisticated. And overall, I will say this, most Americans have a net worth of zero or very little. And so until your net worth is zero, can you actually transfer wealth to your children. Wealth, not money, wealth. Okay? And so some questions on how to get your net worth to zero. And this is actually the point of my video. So I can give you guys some tips that are commonly discussed. One of them being spend less. And not only, so think of it like this, right? Perfect example is the cord cutting cable free movement. So I think on average, a cable bill is about $100, and you seek out and you find some alternatives. I have Sling TV where I pay $35 a month. So that difference between the $100 that I was previously paying and now the $35 is $65. I should be using those savings to pay my debt down, hopefully, and if not, investing that money. Just recategorizing my savings at $65 to another spending category gets me absolutely nowhere when it comes to building wealth. Do I understand that one would take that $65 and apply it to another fixed expense that they have, maybe a utility bill or so on and so forth? That's true. But for the most part, what most people do is they save that $65 on the cable bill, but then they're not really very diligent when it comes to what they do with their actual savings. And so in order to properly affect the wealth equation, you guys, your debt and your assets and your liabilities have to be zero. And so making sure that you're using that savings that you identified and applying it somewhere correctly will improve your overall net worth. So that's point number one, which leads me honestly into point number two, pay off your debt. There are so many methods for paying off your debt, one being the debt snowball, the other one being the debt avalanche. I would encourage you guys, prioritize your non-asset backed debts. Credit card debt should be prioritized. It tends to have a higher interest rate in general, and generally speaking, there's no asset to back it. That's why we move mortgages to the end, because you have your mortgage, but then you also have your asset. And then depending on where your car falls and what your intentions are for your car, prioritizing your car note if you have one. And so I can do a more detailed breakdown of paying off debt. However, I feel like figuring out what approach or whatnot tends to be one of those analysis paralysis type of things where people are so focused on how they're going to pay off debt rather than just paying it off. But my overall advice to you is pay your credit cards off first. If you're lucky and your student loans are currently in forbearance, I would not make payments on that. Prioritize paying off debt in order of interest rate as well as related debt balance. And lastly, paying off something is always better than paying off nothing. However, when it comes to debt, you should have a plan in place, and that should be your plan that you are only assessing maybe once every 6 months or once a year. It's kind of up to you, but it's not something where you should be adjusting your plan. So like, I'm going from debt snowball these 3 months, I'm going to do debt avalanche, and then I'm going to overpay everything, and I'm going to do that and that. You'll end up nowhere. But for debt, you need to have a plan. If not, you're going to be paying for something for about 10 years, if not more. And it's really not worth it. And this brings me to my last point, which is the most important, I believe, when it comes to generational wealth. You see, a lot of us are focused on building wealth for our families, for something greater than ourselves. However, if you look at the data, and this is not something, interestingly enough, that gets charted that often. The most recent study that I could find was in 2015. But if you look at the data, and if I also layer that onto my own life experience, a lot of us are responsible at a very young age for our families. So whether that be, in my case, at the age of 15, I've been working since I was 15 years old, just because I knew that there weren't, at least at that point in time, there were no family resources to be like, hey, can someone do this for me? If anything, I would take my paycheck and use it to contribute to things that overall my family would benefit from. And I don't say that from a place of complaining, because I feel like a lot of and I think it's probably like that for most of us, a lot of our young life experiences were probably not that easy, but I don't know if I would be who I am today if I grew up any differently. So there's that. But all that to say that a lot of us from a very young age feel very, very responsible for supporting our families financially. And as we become older, it's almost like, hey, I will prioritize my family's needs. And I mean, by family, I mean like family of origin. So that may be your parents, your siblings, grandparents, whatever, to where we prioritize those needs over our own. And because we're not thinking about it, that is one of the largest holes. So anyway, when I was going through this data, it's a TD Ameritrade study in 2015, and at that point in time, millennials were giving about $20,000 a year to their families. And I would challenge you to see how much money do you give to your family, and do you even know how much that you give? And I know that this is very out of order for the maybe seriousness of the video, but I just wanted to chime in here and say, if you like what you have heard so far, please like, comment, and subscribe. It costs you absolutely nothing, and it really helps me out more than you know. And a lot of us don't. A lot of it is like, hey, this person needs this here, this person needs this here. So it's a lot of like quick fire extinguishment. That for most of us, or this is per this study, that for most of us is about $20,000 a year. However, people are giving that $20,000 a year and having an average overall debt load, no mortgages included, for $100,000 a year. So that technically means, and not really, but y'all get my drift, that someone could not contribute to their family in 5 years, and then they would become debt free, right? And then be able to essentially not give from an empty pot anymore. I know that there's so much in between like a study and saying not to do things, and this is what you should do in actual life, and putting that into and implementing that. I just encourage you guys, and this is what I do, out of every single family support, whatever, it's a line item on my budget. So I have a separate bank account with a separate debit card that I put a certain amount of money in there after every single paycheck. That way, if something comes up from like a family point of view, that is money that I'm essentially saving for. So think of it as a sinking fund if you're familiar with what that is, but just having those savings separate. And another thing is that nobody should be able to tell you or dictate to you how to spend your own money. I know a lot of people experience a lot of fear when it comes to creating boundaries and standing up for boundaries, but your life is better off when there are boundaries in place. Keep that in mind, keep that at the top of the line. And then secondly, you cannot be responsible for everything. If your family member is reliant on you, that's unfair to you. That kind of pressure is not, we kind of have to stop that like generational cycle of just unquestioned obligation for absolutely no reason. You will be surprised, and once you start having these conversations and standing up for yourself, you will be surprised how people will either change to adjust, or people will show you their true colors, and then you know how to behave accordingly. And this becomes really important long term. So putting that into place right now, you will be so much better for it. And there goes, if you're anything like the average, it was discussed, there goes $20,000 a year in savings. And then have it going the other way. If someone's staying with you, if someone's whatever, even if it's a non-monetary exchange, it should not be long term. I'm all for having, if you live somewhere, for example, having your family live with you, if that's feasible, if that's good for your mental health. However, help people when they are down and out. But once, you have to push them and they should push themselves to get up and running, and it should not be acceptable for someone to just bum off of your hard work either. And at a certain point in time, once they are kind of on their feet, there's nothing wrong with charging a family member rent to stay with you. If they're working, they would be paying rent on the street anyway. So why wouldn't they pay you rent when you're paying the full amount? And those things teach people, A, not to take you for granted, and B, just overall sense of like personal accountability. So I think that's the biggest point of this video, honestly. First rule of wealth building for most women, because that's who watches me, and men can take this too, but this is directly for women, because I think we're natural born caretakers, and we're natural born like, hey, I want everyone to be okay before I'm okay. First rule of building wealth is setting up boundaries with your family, how they affect your spending, trying to plan for unforeseen spending, and really setting up boundaries, you guys, and making sure that they're not just like bleeding the money that you work so hard for. And lastly, these are interrelated. If you do give a family member money, you have every right to know how it was spent, even if they don't like it. If they don't like you putting that boundary in place, then they don't need to be asking you for it. So if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing so. Please comment down below any challenges that you face when it comes to building wealth. Is it an income issue? Is it a spending leakage issue? Is it a spending drainage issue? And if there's any other advice or encouragement that you can offer, please do that. As always, if you made it all the way to the end, please like, comment, and subscribe. It costs you absolutely nothing. Thank you. Bye.